This week's MindEspresso starts off 24 miles above the Earth, at the edge of Earth and space, at the edge of life and death, where a guy named Felix Baumgartner was trying to set the world record for helium height and plummet all the way to the Earth and break the sound barrier in the process. And as Dr. Andy Walshe, who was the head of the Red Bull high performance team, said, at that height, there is no place for self-criticism. And he talked about the need for self-compassion to be a high performer. This concept was a huge aha for me, as I was brought up in an old school family where you criticize to get better, right? You were hard on yourself. But what you find again and again is that self-criticism limits your performance level. And Dr. Walshe found that that happened not only individually, but also on teams, where criticism would lead to blame and would start a blame cycle, and you couldn't do the really, really hard stuff. Right? And Felix Baumgartner said he almost felt self-pity after failing the first time and almost dying, and then he recommitted, was able to remove self-blame and criticism, and finally accomplish the goal. In fact, Dr. Walshe said they take executives out and they take them out in the ocean and they have them hold their breath underwater, not to put them in a stress mode where they're in danger, but to see how they handle themselves. He said the most important thing is, how do you present to yourself? And what happens is, underwater, when you're just with yourself, you learn how you talk to yourself. Do you criticize? Do you panic? Do you work through? What's your process? And the idea here is to wake up executives to the fact that they need some self-compassion. And Kristen Neff, who wrote the book Self-Compassion, found the exact same thing. And she talks about the tension between self-esteem and self-compassion. A lot of people keep chasing self-esteem. They want to prove they're better. They want to chase perfection, and they want to be better than others, right? And with that paradigm, they limit what is possible in their lives and what they can contribute. The flip side is self-compassion. And with self-compassion, you don't hide from mistakes. You just don't judge yourself by those mistakes as good or bad. You take in the information, you process, and you understand that failure is a bigger part, or is part of a bigger picture on how you move together. And she says there's three ways you know if you truly have this self-compassion that will allow you to be a high performer. The first one is, do you exhibit kindness to yourself or criticism to yourself? And where are you on that scale? How often do you exhibit kindness versus criticism to yourself? And by the way, how you treat others is a mirror for how you view yourself, right? So you can actually use the way that you talk to others as a lens for how you are seeing yourself. The second is, do you view yourself as special and isolated, or as part of the greater humanity? And the reality is, with billions and billions of people in the world, none of us is really that special. We may do one thing special, but if we view ourselves as isolated, it actually puts a lot of pressure on us and causes anxiety. So now, if you're self-critical and you view yourself as isolated and special, and no one else has my problem the way I have my problem, suddenly you are alone, and now you have to process in a different way, which leads to anxiety and lower performance. Now, the third important thing that she found is that there are people who identify with their mistakes and successes as them, and those who are simply mindful about them, right? And it doesn't mean we hide from mistakes, but we look at them with mindfulness from a distance. And then we can decide, what do we want to do to make ourselves better? And if you take the witch's brew on the other side, right? You're self-critical, you believe you're special, and you're going to judge yourself by wins and losses. You're going to have a lot of anxiety. You're not going to be able to perform at the highest level. You're not going to be able to change and iterate like you need to do in your personal life and everyone needs to do in the business world. Now, in a move from Dr. Neff to Eckard Tolle, who is the author of The Power of Now, and when I first read the book some 10 years ago, frankly, I thought it was a lot of baloney. I couldn't relate to it because I had an old school background. Now, 10 plus years later, you start to see the power of mindfulness and how it can relate to your life. And he has a really fantastic frame for judging the quality of your mindfulness and the quality of what you're doing throughout the day. And I'll start off at the highest level, which is great enthusiasm, right? That's the highest level of his framework. Next is enjoyment. And one of the critical things he said, you don't get enjoyment from things, you put enjoyment into things. And this is where being mindful and being present and putting your best into things can make the great things out of bad circumstances. You flip that around, you can make terrible things out of great circumstances, right? So enthusiasm, enjoyment, And then acceptance. Now, acceptance is when, you may not be exactly where you want to be, but you're willing to accept this for now, right? You're willing to be present rather than make yourself miserable, which is the fourth rung, right? Which is creating suffering for you. And when you create suffering for yourself, you're creating suffering for those around us. And this is, where you can bring in the old Buddha saying where suffering is a choice, right? Pain is inevitable, suffering is a choice. And Eckard Tolle says, if you're in suffering, it's because you're not in acceptance, you're not in enjoyment, or you're not in enthusiasm. So to wind this back, right, at the top level here, you need self-compassion to be a truly high performer. You know if you're self-compassionate by the kindness you show yourself, by the way you view yourself as part of the whole of humanity where everyone else is suffering and trying and failing and moving ahead still. And when you make a mistake, do you view it with distance and mindfulness, or do you identify with that? And then the frame from Eckard Tolle, which you can view yourself at any point throughout the day, is, am I in a state of suffering? Am I in a state of acceptance? Am I in a state of enjoyment? Or am I in a state of enthusiasm? That is this week's Mind Espresso.